The construction of the legendary liner Titanic began on March 31, 1909 at the Holland & Wolff shipyard in Belfast. Work on the Titanic took about 2 years and its hull was completed on May 31, 1911. The steamship Titanic set out on its first and last voyage. Its route was Southampton, Cherbourg, Queenstown, New York. There were 2,224 people on board the Titanic. The liner could have taken more passengers, but due to low demand at that time of year, it was only half full. The captain of the Titanic was 62-year-old Edward Smith, a very experienced captain of the company. His career spanned more than 40 years. On April 12th, the Titanic began receiving Morse code messages from other ships, warning that there was a significant concentration of icebergs along its route. Around 11 p.m., people gradually began returning to their cabins. There were almost no people left on the ship's deck. On the mast platform, 2 men were on duty, Frederick and Reginald. That night, the moonlight was almost absent, making their job more difficult than usual. At 11:39 p.m., the lookouts on duty spotted an iceberg. They rang the bell 3 times, signaling an obstacle directly ahead. Immediately, the command was given for a hard turn to the left. The Titanic managed to avoid a head-on collision, but unfortunately at 11:40 p.m. the starboard side grazed the underwater part of the iceberg. The iron rivets with micro cracks failed and water rushed into the first 5 compartments. The Titanic began to slow down. By 11:50 p.m. the bow trim had already reached 2 degrees. The captain was informed that the Titanic could stay afloat for a maximum of 1.5 hours. All the cargo compartments were already filled with water, as were several boiler rooms. The flooding of the first-class passengers' cabins began. At 12:05 a.m., the captain ordered the lifeboats to be uncovered and the passengers to be gathered. In just 45 minutes after the collision with the iceberg, more than 14,000 tons of ocean water had flooded into the Titanic, causing it to rapidly sink. At 2:05 a.m., the last lifeboat was lowered from the Titanic. Due to broken doors and hatches, the rate of flooding increased several times over. Many people perished simply because they were unable to escape their cabins or were crushed in the chaos. The tilt of the deck became so steep that people who failed to grab onto heavy objects slid straight into the water. By 2:15 a.m., the trim angle had reached approximately 23 degrees and the ship's propellers began to rise out of the water. At 2:16 a.m., the water deformed the pipeline supporting the first smokestack. It collapsed very quickly, killing dozens of people in the process. Shortly afterward, the lights of the ship began to flicker and then went out completely. In this state, the hull of the liner could not remain intact for long. The bow was being pulled underwater while the stern was angled downward. At 2:18 a.m., the hull of the liner broke into 2 parts, killing many people in the process. After completely detaching, the bow sank, taking on an almost vertical position as it descended. A few minutes later, the stern of the ship began to rapidly sink into the water, eventually disappearing completely beneath the surface. After the stern was fully submerged, more than 100 people were left in the water. The water temperature was -2 degrees Celsius. But most of the people did not survive. At 3:03 a.m., the Carpathia was the first to arrive in response to the distress call, traveling at maximum speed to rescue the survivors. Less than a third of all those on board survived the Titanic disaster. It remains one of the most horrific tragedies in history. Take care of yourselves.